Your Legislators is made possible in part by the generous financial support of MAPE members, making Minnesota clean waters, safe communities, quality education, and veterans care happen. We work hard for Minnesotans. Live from St. Paul, Minnesota, we welcome you to another season of Your Legislators, a roundtable discussion featuring state lawmakers who are prepared to answer your questions and discuss important issues affecting citizens of Minnesota. Now, here's your moderator for tonight's program, Barry Anderson.
Good evening and welcome to this week's version of Your Legislators. Last week we brought you a snowstorm. This week we bring you more unbelievably cold weather. We're going to try to behave ourselves throughout the rest of the session. And we do have a session to talk about. We have leadership with us this evening who will give us an insight into some of the issues that face the Minnesota legislature and the people of the state of Minnesota over the course of the next several months. Before we get to our introductions, I want to remind everyone that this is your program, hence the snappy title, Your Legislators, and invite you to call in your questions at the phone number that's given on the screen or to send them to us to our Facebook page at facebook.com or at our Twitter page, hashtag Your Legislators. Any of those various ways of communicating will get you to our panel tonight, and we look forward to having your questions to deliver to them. Let's begin, as we do each week, by introducing our distinguished panel of guests. We normally have four. We have three right now. Hopefully our fourth will be joining us shortly. But we begin with the Majority Leader of the Minnesota Senate from District 3 in Cook, Minnesota, Senator Tom Bach, a frequent guest on the program. Senator Bach, we're delighted to have you with us. Tell our viewers a little bit about yourself.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be on. I represent a large piece of the Arrowhead region of Minnesota. Carpenter by trade, retired now, and probably my proudest thing is I'm a grandfather of 5, and I have a 6th one on the way.
Very good. And tell everyone where Cook is, in case they don't know.
Cook is on the kind of just on the border of Lake Vermilion, arguably Minnesota's most beautiful lake. About 100 miles straight north of Duluth, about 70 miles south of International Falls. We
were talking about the both the temperature and the snow depth. I think you win on our panel here this evening, I suspect, right?
Well, it's just a brutal winter up north. I looked at the forecast this morning, and we got 4 more nights of 20 below or more. One of my county commissioners from Koochiching County was down this morning, which is the county International Falls is in, and he had 34 below this morning. So
yeah, that's theater of seasons, right?
Pretty tough. Even for us Finlanders, this is a pretty tough winter.
Theater of seasons, indeed. All right, from District 48, Eden Prairie, a frequent guest on our program, been one of us many years. The Minority Leader, and there's an even money chance I'll pronounce his name correctly. So let's try this, Senator David Hann. Did I get that right?
You got it.
I keep throwing on that the long A, but
no, you got it.
Tell our viewers a little bit about yourself, Senator.
Well, thanks for having us here tonight. I represent Eden Prairie and part of Minnetonka, which is the very southwest corner of Hennepin County. Served on a school board for 8 years in Eden Prairie before being elected to the Senate in 2002, and so I'm in my 4th term. Have a business background, worked for 25 years for a food manufacturing company, and married and have 4 kids, and I've got 1 grandchild and 2 more on the way this summer, almost at the same time. So,
all right, well, very good. Well, we're delighted you could join us. And finally, from District 31A, Crown, Minnesota, Minority Leader Representative Kurt Daudt. And Representative Daudt's been with us many times. Tell our viewers a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I represent northern part of Anoka County, so the city of St. Francis, Oak Grove, and Bethel, and now then in Anoka County, and then in Sherburne County, Elk River, Livonia Township, and then in Isani County, I've got 4 townships there. So, and live on my grandparents' farm, and been in the legislature now for 3 years, and enjoying every minute of it.
You know, we were just visiting a little bit about Crown. That also happens to be the home of the late Senator Rod Grams. And we're just talking. We lost Senator Grams late this past fall, and as I understand it, he was a neighbor of yours.
He was a neighbor of mine, and a good friend, and a political mentor, and we lost him I think in October last year, and certainly missed. But he was a great guy, and pillar in our community up there. So.
We're going to be talking a little bit about, as March unfolds, about Senator Charlie Berg, who unfortunately also passed away within the last couple of months, and he was a good friend of this program as well. Well, let's move on to some questions from viewers. I think maybe before we do that, maybe we could just take a couple of minutes and maybe you could tell us from your perspectives where you think the session might go and what the points of interest might be. Senator Bach, let's start with you.
Well, this is not a budget year. If you're around the Capitol, you'd think it was. There are a lot of interest groups lobbying members of the legislature for supplemental spending, considering it appears like we're going to have a small budget surplus. So hopefully it'll get a little bigger tomorrow when the budget forecast comes out. But traditionally there are three things that get considered in these election years, the non-budget year. One is any kind of supplemental budget considerations. People just need to remember last year we passed a 2-year budget based on forecasted revenue. Well, now we get a new forecast tomorrow, and so we'll have a conversation about supplemental spending or supplemental, in this case, probably tax reductions rather than increases because we've got a surplus. So the supplemental budget is one of the considerations. This is the year where we normally do state bonding, capital investment on public buildings all across the state, generally state buildings, colleges, universities, roads and bridges, and state parks and trails. And then we do some regional projects that are local projects that are of kind of regional significance. And then the third thing that is normally done in this even-numbered year is that's when we consider whether we should put anything on the ballot for voters to vote on. Proposed constitutional amendments. There's a number of bills introduced proposing different constitutional amendments. So we'll have a conversation about whether the legislature thinks any of them are worthy enough to be considered by the voters for possible amendment to the Constitution.
Senator Hyand?
Well, I think Tom has covered it pretty well. Those are the basics. There will be a surplus. We're not sure of the exact size. Probably in the neighborhood of about $1 billion. From our perspective, we think that money ought to be returned to the taxpayers, so we're going to be proposing ideas to do that, largely tax cuts of various kinds or tax conformance to the federal tax code and so forth. There will be a bonding bill. We're going to try to keep it at what we would say is a reasonable level. The total we want for the whole bonding bill to see over the 2-year biennium is about $1 billion. We did some last year for the capital, so whatever's left over, $50 million. That's always a challenge to figure out how to fit everybody's needs into a small bucket, but we'll get that done. And there are going to be some other policy issues. I know our friends on the other side of the aisle want to do minimum wage. We're less...
we have a question from a viewer about minimum wage, so we're going to get to that.
I'll go out on a limb and predict we'll have an increase in minimum wage. That's my prediction, my bold prediction. But there's other things, too. From our side, we think we want to talk a little bit about MNsure and try to see if we can do some things to address the problems we've seen and maybe hopefully improve it.
Representative Dowd, anything to add to that list?
Well, I think, Senator Hand covered, I think, what our priorities are, too, for our caucus. And first and foremost, I think we've got a budget surplus, which means that state government has collected too much money from the taxpayers in Minnesota. So our first priority is to make sure that we give those taxpayers their money back. So that'll be top priority, and hopefully we'll have a good session, a good debate on a lot of these other issues as well.
So joining us is the Speaker of the House, Representative Thiessen. We're delighted you could join us.
Sorry I was late.
You can blame it on the roads or the weather. Either one.
I'll blame it on my kids' hockey.
Well, that'll work too. In fact, that's more important. I agree with that. Tell our viewers a little bit about yourself. Introduce yourself to our viewers.
Sure. Well, so I have represented South Minneapolis. Used to represent Richfield for about 12 years now in the legislature. Grew up in Bloomington, Minnesota, and my wife and I have 3 kids, freshmen in high school, and then a 6th grader and a 5th grader. I'm a lawyer in my life outside the legislature, and it's a great, kind of a great honor to be serving the people of Minnesota over at the Capitol.
I just want to mention in passing that I had occasion to bump into a couple of your predecessors in the last few weeks, Steve Swigum, and then today I happened to bump into Judge Phil Carruthers, who was also Speaker of the House, and I told them that I would be seeing their successor, and they wish you well. So
good.
Tell us a little bit about the session from your perspective.
Well, listening in, I think people covered it pretty well. I mean, from my perspective, what we want to do this year is build on what I think were the successes of last year. Significant investments in education, in job creation, some property tax relief. And I think that, what we have to do this year is just make sure that that progress that we made last year, which was really around, from my perspective, growing Minnesota's economy and growing in a way where more and more people can participate in that prosperity, that we keep that moving ahead. So that's kind of how I'm viewing all the issues that come along.
So let's get right to the questions. We have a question from a viewer in St. Paul who has indicated that the news media has reported some disagreement between Senator Bach and Speaker Thiessen about raising the minimum wage and what the legislature should do with the budget surplus. So what do they think is going to happen, and what does the Republican leadership think about this? So start with you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, I agree with Senator Hand that there's likely to be a minimum wage.
I would not take that back.
The legislative process obviously has disagreements, and with the budget surplus, it allows us to look at a number of options as we move forward. I think it's a good spot for us to be in, and there's lots of reasons we got this budget surplus, but at least now we can kind of move forward in a way that doesn't focus so much on the short term, but looks a little bit more long term. On the minimum wage, I think the conference committee met today, Thursday, and I think had a good weighing in of public testimony on both sides of the issue. I think they're going to be able to wrap up a bill relatively quickly. The differences actually aren't that significant, so I think we'll be able to get there. In terms of the budget itself, we've just today passed out about a $500 million tax bill out of tax committee that does primarily middle class tax relief, federal conformity, which includes a marriage penalty, which includes things like conforming on adoption tax credits, making sure that people that went through mortgage foreclosure can take advantage of some tax relief, making sure college tuition gets some tax relief. Those types of things, as well as moving back on those 3 business-to-business taxes. I think that's a good use of some of the surplus that we have right now. We will be doing, I think, the investment. I think all 4 of us probably agree on the investment in long-term care workers and increasing their wages. So I think there's a lot of things that we're going to be able to agree on as we move forward.
Senator Bach?
Well, that's the first time I've ever heard conversations between Representative Thiessen and I characterized as a disagreement. Frankly,
I just read the question.
Well, frankly, I don't agree with that. Whoever wrote it, I don't think that's very accurate. We have a good working relationship. We've got members that have strong opinions, and we have to manage that. So sometimes, because we have members at odds, sometimes think the leaders are at odds, and that's really not true. I guess I'm probably the only leader that was in the legislature in the 90s, and it was a time with a very strong economy, and my first 7 years in office were pretty easy. We cut taxes every year for 7 years in a row, and many of those tax cuts were permanent. We cut income taxes across the board on everybody in 1999. We did it again, permanent income tax cuts in 2000. 2001, we did something very popular with homeowners. We took the general education levy for your K-12 schools off of your property tax, $900 million a year that cost permanently, and shifted that over to the state's general fund. And the result of those 7 years of significant tax cutting when the economy was very strong was by 2002, when Governor Plenty was elected, he was facing a $4.3 billion deficit. And I would argue, having been through that, the appetite to cut taxes got a little too strong. It seemed like the revenue was never going to quit coming in. And then starting in 2002, we went into managing deficits for more than a decade. And that's difficult. And whether it's in your home or in your business, the church you go to, if you are always managing a deficit, it's very hard to make good decisions about the future. So we went through a long period of different kinds of accounting gimmicks and loans, borrowing from schools, to try to keep the state's budget in balance. We didn't invest any new money in our long-term care and our nursing home facilities for a decade, and we're way behind there. And if you can't make investments in those things that we all agree are important, because you're managing a crisis, and I just don't want to reach so far on the permanent tax cut side that we find ourselves in a situation where we're managing deficits again, because I've been through that, and it's very difficult. So I think the Senate's going to be a little more cautious. We'll know tomorrow when the budget forecast comes out kind of how much room there is to make tax cuts or commit spending that has tails into the next biennium. But there are a lot of ways to give, if the Republican concern is that we give tax relief to businesses, there are a lot of different ways to do that. Some of them don't require big tails in the next biennium. So it really all kind of depends on what the revenue outlet looks like tomorrow. And I don't want anybody to think the Senate's not going to consider tax relief, because I'm sure it's going to be one of the things that will be on the plate. We just might have a little different idea about what tax relief looks like.
Senator Hahn?
Well, I think, as we said, we think the surplus ought to be dealt with by primarily finding ways to return the money to taxpayers. We think that most of that could be done with tax relief in some form or the other. We think it's going to affect families. Some of it is business oriented, but we think we want to try to help all Minnesotans by reducing the money, returning the money that we have collected or projected to collect over and above what the budget is called for. And I think, Tom makes a good point that we've had some periods of struggling with deficits over the years, but from our standpoint, that reflects an overly aggressive spending regimen. When you have budget growth of double digits like we had this last year, 10% growth in spending, you can't devise a tax plan that will finance that. We think that if we found a way to keep spending in that 2 to 3% growth rate aligned with the economic growth of the state, that it would be manageable. We wouldn't have to worry about over-collecting, raising the tax rates. Normal business activity as it grows would generate those funds, and that's what we believe. That's what we acted on when we were in the majority. We think that has borne out to be true. So we're going to be looking at that. And the question was a little bit about minimum wage, and while I predict we'll have one, we're a little concerned about the aggressive nature of it. I think if we match the federal conformity, that would be a 40% increase in the minimum wage. We think that is probably doable and probably not too harmful to the economy, but there's no question, in my opinion, that economists believe that this does hurt job growth, hurts economic opportunities for people. We've got to be very cautious about how high that grows.
One of the things that's been the most frustrating for me, I think, is I always feel like we're talking about the wrong things in St. Paul, and we're not really looking at the problems and solving those, working towards a solution. And I remember recently reading an article about the city in the country that had the highest rent paid for average rent paid for a single bedroom apartment, and interesting to find out that it wasn't New York City or Los Angeles, it was Bismarck, North Dakota. And I keep thinking, in Bismarck, North Dakota, they're not worried about what the minimum wage is or in increasing it. And I think rather than do the things that we can do to kind of inspire job creation in the economy, we're doing things like raise the minimum wage. And I know that other states that have raised the minimum wage have seen less job opportunities for their citizens. And I think that, while raising the minimum wage sounds great, unfortunately it doesn't solve the actual problem. And frankly, it's just not fair to the people that are going to lose their jobs because of it.
Speaker Thiessen, I want to go back to the minimum wage thing just so that our viewers understand the process here. You talked about a conference committee, and the reason there's a conference committee is that the House and Senate had passed different bills in the last year, and this is all part of the same session. So there's a conference committee to try to work out those differences.
That's exactly correct. Yes, so the House, that's right. It was in conference committee at the end of last session. That conference committee didn't reach agreement, and so we could reconstitute it this year. And so they're meeting. I would say this notion of going to the federal minimum wage, that's actually not even an increase in the minimum wage in Minnesota, because most businesses pay the federal minimum wage in this state. So that's kind of it's a nice thing to say, but it doesn't really reflect reality. It wouldn't be an increase for folks. And this point on the minimum wage, many economists, a group of 600 economists say it actually doesn't affect jobs in the state where it's raised. And in our two most recent experiences in Minnesota in the mid-'90s and the mid-2000s, when we last raised the minimum wage, there wasn't a decrease in jobs overall. That didn't happen. In fact, job creation continued to grow. And I anticipate that that's going to happen again, because when you put the money in people's pockets, especially people making the minimum wage, they're going to spend that money. It's going to be recirculated back into their community. So, and to this idea that it's not really going to help people, I mean, that's just kind of absurd on its face, because one of the things we know is that it's actually, if the federal minimum wage was raised, one thing we know from recent studies is that it's several hundred 200,000 people would be raised out of poverty in this country, and I think that that's true. The minimum wage today, if you work a 40-hour week, you don't even earn poverty wages. And that's just not right. And at the end of the day, we can have all the economic arguments that we want to have about this, but at the end of the day, it's just not right for someone that's working a full-time job to have to live in poverty. And unfortunately, that's the situation that we have in this state. We're not even going to solve it with the minimum wage that we want to go to, but at least we're making progress in that direction. I think just fundamental values of fairness and honoring what hard work is about calls for us to take this action. I anticipate that we'll take it relatively quickly.
But the same study that you referred to that talks about the lifting out of poverty of several 100,000 people also said there's going to be several 100,000 jobs that are lost, people who lose their job because of raising minimum wage.
But more jobs are going to be created overall.
But the point is, though, any business that you say you're going to mandate a higher cost in wages, that is going to come from somewhere. And if you're a business owner and you've got people employed, you're going to have to cut your budget somewhere else. You might have to cut benefits. You might have to say we're not going to hire people, or maybe we're going to have to maybe fire people. Who knows what you have to do? But that's what happens. That's the reality. So to say that this doesn't affect the economy or affect employment is just not true. Every business owner knows that's true. And most of the businesses affected by a higher minimum wage are smaller businesses. The bigger businesses, they already pay far more than minimum wage. So it's going to be small businesses, Main Street businesses, nursing homes that have come to us and said, if you raise minimum wage, you'll have to increase funding because we can't afford to pay it. So these things do have an effect. I think we should do something, but I think it should be modest. I think we should do it with the idea that somebody's going to have to pay the costs. And unfortunately, it's not going to be the state government. It's going to be consumers. It's going to be people paying higher prices.
But the economy is going to grow overall, and that's what we ought to be focused on.
All right. Yeah, I have a feeling we're not going to resolve this tonight. I don't know why I think that, but I just think that's the case. So we have a viewer who wants to talk about MNsure, and this viewer is quite unhappy about the status of things. I think we can probably summarize the question and just simply say that he doesn't think MNsure has worked, and he's wondering what the legislature, if anything, is going to do about that. So who wants to take a run at that first? Senator Han, I think you introduced the topic, so maybe we'll pick on you.
Well, yes, I think we are concerned about MNsure from our side. Obviously, many of us didn't support the bill. We had other ideas at the time, but it is the law. But there's no question that the implementation of the MNsure exchange has been very problematic. It still is not working. There have been, I don't know, a couple 100,000, 200,000-300,000 people who have had to give up their insurance that they preferred to try something else, some of which they don't prefer. The costs, the premium costs have gone up in many cases. The other side likes to say we have lower premium costs compared to other states, but not compared to where we were before we had the law. So we think there are things that should be addressed. We think the governance of the MNsure exchange needs to be looked at for ideas that we had when the law was passed that were not adopted that have to do with the governance structure, with the powers of the governing board, whether or not they ought to do active purchasing, for example, which in our opinion just reduces choices people have. But there are things that are very fundamentally flawed with this law, and we're concerned that we are losing the ability to control health care and health insurance in this state, that it's all going to go to Washington, and we're going to have to go and beg them for waivers and other things in the future to do things that are very commonsensical. So we are concerned. We want to try to rein that in and bring control of health care back to Minnesota.
MNsure, Representative Keeson?
So, well, and I sympathize with the person if they've had trouble getting through the process, and there have been too many people over the last several months that have had that experience with the website. I mean, the good news on that is that right now the wait times are drastically reduced. We're down to about a minute wait time at the most. We have over 98% of people now getting through the process on their first time through, so people are making it through the MNsure process and getting to insurance, and so I think those improvements are a good thing. More than that, the reality is over 100,000 people now have actually gotten insurance through the exchange. A lot more have gotten insurance in the private market at these lower premiums, the lowest in the country, as a matter of fact, at these lower premiums because they can contract directly, but the deals negotiated with the insurance companies in the MNsure program are also available to people buying it outside the MNsure program. So a lot, even more than that, are getting the benefit of these lower premiums that were the result of this competition. I mean, that's really what the exchange is about, transparency and competition. And then there's the expansion of Medicaid that had happened as well. So another couple 100,000 people are getting coverage today that didn't have coverage before. So, at the end of the day, I think what our goal ought to be, and I don't know that there's the action we need to take this year to fix it, because I think that the MNsure board and the people working there are actually fixing the processes. But at the end of the day, what we need to do is make sure that the direction we're heading with this is continuing to expand access for people. And the worst thing we could do, from my perspective, is to go back to the status quo, which is what we had before. And everybody's claim, the Republicans like to claim that this was a magnificent system that we had in Minnesota before. And we did have a nation-leading. I still think we have a nation-leading medical system because of the hard work of our providers out there, the fact that we have a healthy population, and we're continuing to make strides on that. I saw obesity rates for children, came down once again. So there's a lot of good things happening in healthcare right now in this state. But the fact of the matter is, before, people with pre-existing conditions couldn't get affordable coverage. And one thing we did in MNsure is make sure that happened. People had annual and lifetime limits. The Republicans, at least in Washington, D.C., want to go back on that, as well as the pre-existing conditions. Going back to the system that we had in 2008 and 2009, when a lot of people in this state couldn't have access to insurance, or if they had access to insurance, it was not meaningful insurance because they weren't paying. They were paying premiums for insurance that they couldn't access because of huge deductibles, et cetera. I don't think people want to go back to that old system. So my sense is we should help people get through the system, and to the extent we need long-term to continue to make changes, we should continue to improve the system. But, nothing's perfect overnight, and I think we're moving in the right direction.
Can I just jump in and just say I think, from my perspective, I think Minnesotans want to go back to a market-based system, and this clearly isn't. We have spent $160 million on this project, and to date, there is no evidence that anyone today is being insured that wasn't insured before. We've forced a lot of people to change their insurance, but in many cases to buy insurance that they didn't want. You've got elderly men buying insurance that covers maternity stuff, for example. You don't need to do that.
Well, in fact, I think we should have people. I mean, unless you only want people, the women that are pregnancy age, to pay the full cost of having to have kids, which is what you're arguing for, and I don't disagree. I think we should all have a vested interest in making sure we have healthy before childbirth and during childbirth and raising those kids.
But
and I think that's a difference of philosophy that we have.
You can get it, in our opinion, you can get better savings, better efficiencies by employing market choices rather than limiting choices and having bureaucrats and government people decide what those choices look like. And I think that's the great failure. But it is the law. That's what Obamacare is. Our concern is that we have to live with it for the time being, but we ought to be working at trying to make sure we have the ability to make choices in Minnesota. We ought to be pushing back on the federal government, saying, don't do stuff to us that we don't agree with. And there's lots of things, I think, on both sides of the aisle that we think don't make sense with this law, but we've lost control. We need to get it back.
Senator Bach?
Well, I think the reality is this is a federal law, and it's not going to be repealed. So in Minnesota, we had two choices. We either could default and let the federal government write our exchange, or we here in Minnesota could develop our own exchange. There was broad support to develop our own exchange. Even the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, who oftentimes I and Democrats probably don't agree with on things, thought it was best for Minnesota to do its own exchange. We did that. There have been plenty of bumps in the road, but this is a big change. And big changes, especially, and most of the problems have been around technology and the implementation of it, and we're making tremendous progress there. And I think this is a point in time we will look back on and say, you know what, it was the right thing to do. I expect everybody's going to have health insurance. And I know when Medicare was passed during the Lyndon Johnson days of the Great Society, there was a lot of anxiety about that too. But no one today is calling for the repeal of Medicare. And it's going to take a little while, I think, to iron some of the bugs out, but I do think it's the right policy, not only for our state, but for our country.
I think, this system is more flawed, I think, and we're finding out every day. Just yesterday, the MNsure board put out their projections for the number of people going into the private pay portion of MNsure. Their projections originally back in, I think it was March of 2013, were about 160,000 people that they suspected would be going in. They revised that lower last October or November, and now that number is right around 50,000. So it's less than a third of what they originally thought were going to go in. And the real problem here, and it's going to cause a huge problem for the rate increase that's coming around the corner, is that the population that's going in doesn't have high enough numbers of the young, healthy people that we need to maintain the rates that have been put in place. So and I think we're lagging behind what they projected when they set these rates by somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 20% less of those younger, healthy people going into the MNsure system than what we need to maintain those kinds of rates. So unless we do something, unless something changes, we're going to see huge rate increases this fall. And you know, people are paying more for health insurance today through MNsure than they were before. And as Senator Hand said, there's no evidence yet that anybody has obtained insurance through MNsure that didn't have it before. So yes, there are some subsidies available, and yes, people are getting that, but ultimately people are unhappy with MNsure. And I think there were some polling numbers out earlier this week that said that fully half of Minnesotans don't think that this is a better system for Minnesota. And I agree. I'm not suggesting that we should necessarily repeal this, but we can't put our heads in the sand and pretend like it's going to get better without us doing something about it.
That's the first time I've heard that.
We made news tonight.
There
So,
we go. What's the idea of, instead of, if you don't want to repeal it, what do you want to do?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things we can do to fix it, but you know, we offered over 100 amendments in the House that were rejected. We had about 8, I think, that were accepted, but over 100 amendments from House Republicans through the process that were rejected. I think there's a lot of things we can do to change the makeup of the board as far as getting people that have that insurance experience involved in the process. But really, it's a real problem. We don't have the populations going in, and we need to address that.
Well, I think, to answer your question, I think there are a lot of people who think we ought to be block granting Medicaid, for example, dollars, instead of having the federal government define Medicaid. And as a person who tried to manage that budget for a couple of years, let me tell you, you get your hands tied. You can't deal with over half the budget when you have to deal with the Medicaid laws as the federal government makes. So my suggestion would be get a block grant from the federal government. Let us manage whatever the new law is to the way we want to do it. And if we were able to do that, I think we could make some decisions about how to do this more effectively, how to do it more cheaply, how to incorporate some market choices into this thing. That's what we need to have.
And back to your point too about not repealing this. I mean, certainly I think that we could put a market-based solution in place that would be much better than what we have there, and that would ensure that we'd have the lower rates that I think Minnesotans are expecting. But there's going to be a lot of disappointment because expectations are being set that we're going to have the lowest rates in the country and that people are going to get low coverage or low-cost health coverage. And unfortunately, if the current trends continue with the populations that are going in, we're not going to have that, and people are going to be very disappointed. So would I repeal it? Yes, but unfortunately we've got the Affordable Care Act in place that's mandating that we do this. So,
Speaker Thiessen, give you the last word on this one if you have anything.
Well, the market-based solution is the same solution the Republicans have been talking about for 20 years. And if you go back to 2000, and probably what we had in place before MNsure, I mean, MNsure itself is a marketplace. That's the whole idea. And it didn't work. So I'm looking, just to say market-based solution is a nice slogan, but it doesn't really answer the question.
Well, we'll have a chance to discuss that in the weeks ahead, I think. So let's talk about an issue that you raised, Senator Bach, which was this question of the 5% wage increase for those who work with individuals with disabilities in long-term care. We have a viewer from Canby who wants to know when that's likely to happen, and she wants to know how the panel feels about it. And I'll throw in here a question from Hutchinson. Viewer there wants to know about whether or not the legislature is going to consider increasing funding for nursing homes, concerned about nursing home funding. I think those are sort of tangentially related questions. But let's talk about that 5% thing and start with you.
Well, there is a pretty significant campaign working their way around the halls of the Capitol to increase payments to residential group home type providers that work with, that house people with disabilities, not nursing homes, more group home type settings. It's very expensive to do. I mean, there are a lot of group home providers around the state. A 5% increase for those providers is going to cost in the neighborhood of about $80 million a year. Nursing homes, the cost is not quite as high to raise their reimbursements. I think it's around $7 or $8 million per 1% per year. I do think out of this session you're going to see some new revenue both for the residential group home type settings and for nursing homes. 5% is probably pretty aggressive, but I mean it really depends on what the budget forecast shows tomorrow. But I will tell you, when it comes to any new spending or tax cuts, before I am going to agree to tax cuts for warehousing people or tax cuts for businesses, I want to make sure we take care of all our long-term care facilities that that take care of our most vulnerable Minnesotans. And the challenge is, I believe, and most economists will tell you, we're headed for a significant labor shortage in this country. And as that happens and employees get put into competition, nursing homes, they can't pay more wages because they only receive the revenue that the state gives them. We don't even allow nursing homes to charge a higher rate to private pay patients. We only allow them to charge what the state sets for the rate. So they have no opportunity to raise more revenue. So as people get put into competition in this labor shortage, the private industry can respond very easily if there's a labor shortage and raise wages to attract workers. And one of my biggest fears is that working in a long-term care facility, and those people that work in those places are angels that care for these people, and the people that are residents in those facilities develop strong relationships with their caregivers. And it's very emotional when somebody leaves and that vulnerable person now has to build a relationship with a new caregiver. And we can't have wages at the level where those caregivers every night are going home, working on their computer, polishing up their resume, doing job searches, and continue to have this churning in these long-term care facilities. I think it's just wonderful that people are willing to do that very, very hard work. But when you can go down the street and earn more money and have a much easier job, I mean, I understand why people have an interest in doing that. And then the long-term care facilities are faced with the turnover, all the additional training costs of having to educate, on new workers. So it's always dangerous to pick your highest priority for spending for fear everyone else is going to be mad at you. But for me, I mean, I'm just going to say it. I think taking care of our vulnerable people in our long-term care facilities is my number one spending priority for this session. And that's not to say we're going to be able to reach the whole 5% that people want, but I do think if there's surplus money, there is an opportunity to make some improvements and improve the wages of those long-term care workers.
Senator Hunt?
Well, I would agree. I think it is our highest priority as well, and we want to see this 5% campaign, so-called, be successful. It isn't, just to make a slight correction, it isn't a 5% increase in wages. It is a 5% increase in reimbursement to the home and community-based services. Most of that will turn into wages, but it's not a direct 5% increase in wages. And we support that, and I agree that trying to set a priority for the people who are vulnerable and the people who care for them is a huge priority. When we were in the majority and Representative Aber and I were on the committees, we had talked about this and tried to do it then, didn't have the resources, so we've supported this, and I think we will do that. The nursing home funding, I believe there will be an increase in funding, partly because if we do an increase in minimum wage, the very thing you're talking about, Tom, they're going to have their workers go down the street and go to work for other places where the higher minimum wage is going to be. They cannot go out and charge higher prices to people who can afford it. We have rate equalization, one of the 2 states in the country that do it. They are totally dependent on state resources, so we will have to increase funding to the nursing homes just to cover the minimum wage increase. So I think there will be at least that.
Senator Hand summed it up pretty well. I think, my caucus is pretty supportive of these initiatives as well, and I agree that, if there's one place we can spend, it's to take care of the people that take care of our elderly and most vulnerable populations. So I think my caucus is pretty supportive of the 5% campaign as well.
Mr. Speaker?
Nothing more to add.
We have a viewer from Crystal who says this is supposed to be the unsession. Has there been any discussion about eliminating the position of lieutenant governor? What about decreasing the size of the legislature? How about any big picture reforms like this? Anybody want to take a run at this? Senator Hand?
Well, there's been a lot of talk, and there's been some work. Representative Thiessen has probably led that to try to look at some of the things that we've put in place over the years, commissions and task forces that haven't been really doing that much, and we've got a bill that has been put together to eliminate that. That may not be a big idea, but stuff we need to do. There's been also discussion with the governor's staff to try to look at the entire range of the statutes to find things that we could eliminate. I don't know yet there's been any huge ideas. Of course, we're talking about undoing some of the tax increases that were done last year. Maybe that doesn't qualify, but from our perspective, we hope that's part of it. And there are a few other things that could be looked at. Maybe it's permitting or other forms of regulation. But we really haven't heard the really big ideas from the governor about what he wants to see with this. So there's been a few things that have been talked about. I think we will see some things. I don't know what the big ideas are yet.
Yeah, the viewer-specific question was about, say, the lieutenant governor. Is there any talk about doing something with that?
I don't know that serious talk from, I mean, I personally believe, and we were talking about this a little bit before the program, that it would be good if the lieutenant governor had, in my view, some more defined duties. And I think that right now it's very difficult to look at someone that is on the ticket mostly for an election and hoping to be there when there's a need for it, and that's it. I think there needs to be some duties attached to it.
Mr. Speaker, your thoughts? You help control the agenda on your side of the Capitol.
So I don't know that there's been much talk on the lieutenant governor piece either. There has been some talk in terms of reducing the size of the legislature that Tom and I have had, but I don't know if we're going to move on that this year either. But I do think that there's, I mean, the good thing about the governor highlighting the unsession idea is it does kind of just, focus our attention on something we should be focused on, quite frankly, every year, which is making government work better and more efficiently. And that's happened on a bipartisan basis over the time I've been in the legislature, and it's not the most exciting stuff in the world, but it does it does improve people's lives. And I think the administration has done a lot, actually, in the 3 years so far to work on that, including and led by the lieutenant governor candidate, Tina Smith, the governor just chose to be his new running mate. But I do think there's a couple things that come to mind. I do think the rulemaking and the there'll be some permitting work that will happen to continue to try to make that process work most smoothly. I think there'll be some work around special education paperwork and making sure that special ed teachers can spend more time with their kids instead of with papers in front of them. Looking at aligning some of our other programs like our teacher evaluation system with some other systems that have been set up in the past to make those work more smoothly together. So I think that there will be some progress made here in terms of making government work better. It's not going to be the only thing that happens this session, but keeping that focus there, I think, is always a good thing.
I think that certainly the unsession is a theme that we bipartisanly can all support. Getting rid of some of the old, antiquated things that are in statute. When the governor first announced the unsession in his State of the State speech, I think it was in 2013. What jumped into my mind and what I think maybe a lot of the public thinks is that this was maybe going to be a shorter session where not a lot was necessarily tackled. And I always think of maybe what we shouldn't do at a time when Minnesota's economy is kind of naturally recovering on its own is not let government get in the way. So to me, I think of the unsession as let's not do any harm to Minnesota's economy. Unfortunately, there's a lot of proposals being proposed right now as we speak at the legislature that unfortunately don't fit with that part of the theme of what I think of as the unsession. So we'll see how this progresses.
Well, we're getting the governor's bills. They come in by department, and some of them are jacketed up in the form of bills and introduced. Some of them are actually in the revisor's office, and the revisors are our attorneys that actually draft all the language so it fits in the proper place into statute. Some of them are currently being jacketed for introduction in the House and the Senate. They'll be moving through all of the appropriate committees. There's a lot of stuff there in thousands and thousands of pages of legislation in the different department jurisdictions that'll be moving through the legislature. And, some of the things I think the members of the legislature are going to think are really good ideas and really antiquated. And I think in some places probably the governor's going to be a little more aggressive than members of the legislature might be willing to go. But I do think a significant package will end up passing. On the issue of cutting the size of the legislature, the Speaker and I have talked about that a little bit. It's not a new issue to me. I was actually a co-author on a bill to do that back in 2011 that turned out it didn't move, so it's not a new issue to me. I don't know if we're going to have a bill this year or not. It doesn't require, I think many people probably think, well, gee, that takes a constitutional amendment. It does not do that. The legislature has within its authority the ability to be able to set the number of members of the House and the Senate. I think we have the largest Senate in the country. I think most former leaders of the Senate will probably tell you it'd probably be a little easier to manage if they didn't have quite as many members to manage. So leaders are
lucky.
Leaders are probably a little bit biased, and it might even be a little bit self-serving. That it'd be a little easier if I had a few less cat staff to herd some days. But
67 senators, right?
67,
Yeah.
largest in the country. And there was a time that was there was probably a time for that. But today, with all the computer technology, my district, for example, there are 9 states that are smaller than my Senate district. Even Maryland, which we don't think of as that small a state, is about 500 square miles smaller than my Senate district. So with today's technology, I don't think it's as important to have smaller districts. But I don't know if it's something that's going to get introduced or will have any legs under it. Like I say, I was a co-author in 2011 when the Republicans controlled the Senate, and it didn't go anywhere then. And if it gets introduced this year, it may well be it doesn't go anywhere under Democratic control either. I just don't know yet.
A viewer from Northern Hubbard County wants to talk about the homestead credit. This viewer says the caller is a farmer and wants to know whether the Democratic-controlled House and Senate will restore the homestead credit that the viewer believes the Republicans took away several years ago. What's the status of the homestead credit? Who wants to talk about that, if anything?
Well, so the Tom's the tax guy, but I'll take a crack and you can correct me. The homestead credit, was truly direct property tax relief that the state gave to homeowners, to people that own homesteads, in the form of a write down on their property taxes. So it was nothing that funneled through cities or counties, where they had discretion of it. It was money that went from the state directly to those homeowners on their property tax statement. And it was eliminated in 2011 in the budget after the state shutdown, I guess. And so in 2013, we did a number of things to restore property tax relief. We increased LGA funding, but we also increased what we call our PTR, the property tax relief program, where you get a direct payment if your property taxes go up a significant amount, and expanded that for several 100,000 Minnesotans, and on an average, I think, of about $212. The viewer, though, one of the side impacts of the elimination of the homestead credit, one of the very significant ones, was the fact that it actually shifted property taxes it shifted property taxes to ag land. And I think that caller was a farmer.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so it actually had an impact of even raising property taxes on ag land even more significantly than it did on homeowners and small businesses. It really raised property taxes on everybody, the elimination of it, but ag land in particular. One of the things we'd like to do this year is look at a similar thing, a property tax credit that would be applied to ag land. We already have it in statute, but it's relatively small right now. We'd like to expand that this year as one of our ideas for improving the situation around property taxes across the state.
Senator?
Well, the speaker, for a guy that's never served on the tax committee, did a very nice job of explaining that. There was, I think, an unintended consequence, and I could see it in 2011 when the Republicans eliminated the homestead credit. What they did to try and mitigate the impact, and I give them credit for trying to mitigate the impact on the individual homeowner, is they reduced the market value of your home. And the result of that was the tax capacity in any jurisdiction, much of the homeowner property tax base was taken away because it was just artificially reduced. Well, the local units of government were still going to levy the same amount of money, but there was actually less taxable property attributable to homes at that point. So when you levy the same amount of money, more of the burden fell on commercial industrial property, on agricultural type property, on seasonal rec type property. So there was a significant tax shift that went on. Frankly, I was very surprised as I watched all that play out, because I was the former taxer of the Senate, so I had a pretty good understanding of what was going to happen. I was very surprised that the State Chamber of Commerce supported that tax reform, because I knew the impact it would have on increasing property taxes on main streets. But that is what happened. The problem with trying to change it back, and with any kind of changes in the property tax system, is there's always shifting going on. And the legislature generally has tried to mitigate the winners and losers in that. So you have to be willing, anytime you do any property tax reform, you have to be willing to commit some significant state resources on an ongoing basis to try and minimize the number of winners and losers. And I don't sense a lot of appetite in going into property tax reform this year. Most of the talk I hear is about taking a look at the new sales tax provisions that were implemented last year. That seems to be the highest priority among Minnesotans, at least. And so I think if we're going to do something more on property tax relief, it probably has to wait another session. But I tell you what, property taxes are a growing problem in the state. They've more than doubled in the last 10 years. And I think we need to keep a very close eye on those property tax trends. And it could well be by next session that it might be the issue people are talking about rather than warehousing and sales tax provisions.
Right. The description of how this tax was handled isn't exactly right in that this was a credit that basically what the state did was reduce the property tax levy that was set by the local unit of government and reduce that amount, and then the state would reimburse the difference. Unfortunately, in the previous 10 years, I don't think there was a single year where the state actually lived up to its promise to the local units of government. And, I saw this firsthand as a county commissioner in Isanti County. It just didn't work. And what happened was that local units of government, when the state would run into a budget shortfall, they would steal money from this pot because it was easy, and the local units of government were left holding the bag for that amount of money. And the second part of the viewer's question was, will the Democrats bring this back? I think I'm going to give you a little bit of an out here because it was a promise that Democrats made to the taxpayers. I think it was one of the top promises that Democrats said that they were going to bring back this market value homestead credit, and they have not. And frankly, I'm not sure they will because it didn't work in the past as far as from the perspective of local governments holding the bag. And the state kind of stealing the money from the local governments. So it's probably not the best idea to bring it back. And as far as, taxes shifting to ag land and to businesses, part of that tax package was Republicans had voted to eliminate the statewide commercial property tax. And we sent that bill to the governor's desk twice. So the fact that property taxes on Main Street went up, the governor vetoed that both times. So the fact that property taxes went up on businesses because of that that really fell on the governor. So and agricultural properties, I know that's been a concern through the recession when values for homes were dropping. Ag properties were the only properties that we're seeing either holding strong or in a lot of cases increased values through that recession because farming was very strong through the recession.
There is no question that people that live in or represent the suburbs don't feel the urgency about this issue, and I'll just explain why. That elimination of the market value homestead credit was devastating to rural Minnesota because the only homeowners who got it were those whose homes were valued under $414,000. If your home was valued over $414,000, you didn't lose anything when the homestead credit was taken away because you didn't get it. So in many of the suburban cities, especially, Senator Hand's district, and I'm glad they have a lot of wealth in Eden Prairie, that's a good thing, but his community felt almost no impact of the elimination of the market value homestead credit. And where I live, where we have a lot of low-value homes.
And where I live.
And where you live, there was a huge impact. Most of the burden of the elimination of the market value homestead credit fell on rural Minnesota and rural communities. And that's what was so unfair about it. It seems like if we had to cut the budget, we all should have shared in that. And the wealthier communities with the higher valued homes should have been asked to help contribute to the state's budget challenge.
The market value homestead credit was replaced with a different mechanism that, as Senator Bach said, reduced the value of those homes. So that was designed to mitigate. Now, whether it has or not, I think we probably should take another look and see whether that's actually helped those homeowners. But ultimately, going back to the market value homestead credit probably isn't the best idea, but I do believe that Minnesotans deserve some property tax relief, and I hope that we can figure out how to get it to them.
The only thing that I would say about this, I think the easiest way to sum this up is in the previous biennium, when the Republicans were charged, repealed the homestead credit, property tax help from the state was reduced by about $400 million. This year, we put about $250 million into property tax relief, including into the form of direct property tax relief, which was what the homestead credit did. I mean, people can talk about local governments. What I care about is the actual homeowner, and what the homestead credit did is take away direct property tax relief from homeowners, and the local governments I'm glad that you
Well,
care so much about local governments, but I care about the homeowners.
The statistics show that because of that budget that Republicans passed over those 2 years, that property taxes for homeowners statewide went down 3%. That's a fact. And we're going to find out tomorrow, because it's tomorrow afternoon, and I'm a little curious as to why it's happening on late on a Friday afternoon. But the initial projections were we're going to see the property tax numbers as a result of the Democrats' budget tomorrow afternoon, and we'll know at that time whether Democrats have lived up to their promises and reduced property taxes.
Even the preliminary numbers showed that the property taxes on homeowners went down under our budget as well. And they're going to probably go down even more because preliminary levies tend to be higher than the final levies.
The preliminary levies showed that we were going to see a 2% increase in property taxes because of your budget. So we'll find out tomorrow afternoon.
Overall was significantly higher than that, as you well know, than the 2%. But on homeowners, it actually did go down.
Senator Hand, any thoughts on this?
Well, it's been pretty well hashed out here. I do think that generally, though, I do get concerned when we make a commitment at the state level to do things to, in effect, pay the property taxes of local people. I do think that's a problem. We have local government, school boards, and they are charged with providing services for local people. And we have done things over the years to distance local folks from their local government. And that, to me, is a bad way to govern. You have to make sure that people who elect folks to represent them on the school board or city council or counties, that they have the resources to do what they want, and they have to have that check and balance so they don't overspend. If we don't have that relationship, then what we're left with is letting those local unit governments continue to spend at the rate they do, and then come to the legislature and say, make it up, make it up. That is not a good governing model, and we've done too much of that. We need to restore some balance in this. I'm not going to say that what we have is the right balance, but we need to keep looking at the property tax.
The state has a role to play in being kind of the equalizer. And here's my example. And the property tax system is very complicated. And it's complicated because whether you live in Senator Hand's district and have a $500,000 home, or you live in my district and you might have a $60,000 home in the little town of Cook where I live, the cost of a fire truck is the same. To provide for fire and emergency services, and who has more capacity to be able to pay for one. And so the state has formulas to help mitigate property tax impacts so that essential services in communities, things like water lines and sewer lines and public safety, that there's not a disproportionate burden in different communities. The ideal situation would be that the property tax burden on a $100,000 home in every district around the state would be the same in every home. And to the extent we can, we try to mitigate that with the property tax system so that essential services can be provided for the same kind of tax rate in different communities, and that's very complicated.
That's going to be the last word on this. And I recognize there are more things to be said, but unfortunately, our time has come to an end this evening. I want to thank the leadership of the House and Senate for making time available on this evening to come in and visit with people of Minnesota. I want to thank you, the viewers, for joining us tonight. I want to invite you to be with us not only next week, but every week that follows until the legislature goes home. We'll be right here with your legislators, and we look forward to visiting with you. Thank you, and good night.
There's much more about your legislators online at pioneer.org. Find out more about the history of the program, who's been a guest, and watch all our past episodes. There's also a photo gallery, informative links, and much more. You can also get involved and stay in touch by following us on Twitter and join the discussion on our Facebook page. Thank you for watching Your Legislators. Your Legislators is made possible in part by the generous financial support of MAPE members, making Minnesota clean waters, safe communities, quality education, and veterans care happen. We work hard for Minnesotans.